Good evening, everyone, and thank you for joining us tonight with the NEIS Night with the Experts. This is a monthly program sponsored by the Nuclear Energy Information Service based in Chicago, where we bring experts on different issues and aspects of the nuclear power, nuclear waste, and radiation world to you, so you have an opportunity to not only hear what they have to say and what their experiences are, but also you'll have the opportunity a little later on to ask questions and engage in dialogue, both with the presenter and also with each other. My name is Dave Kraft. I'm director at NEIS here in Chicago. And a little bit of housekeeping. First, I want to let you know that the session tonight is going to be recorded. So if you don't want your visage to be recorded, you can turn off your camera. But it will be recorded and posted at a later date on YouTube. Secondly, as you are aware, obviously, we're doing this one a week early. We usually do Night with the Experts on the last Thursday of each month, but next week being Halloween, we decided that would be too much competition, so we didn't want to do that. That said, I would also mention that next month, we are not going to do it on the last Thursday of the month because that will be the US Thanksgiving. So we'll be doing that a week early as well on November 21st. That'll be 7 p.m. Central Time. And a little later in tonight's program, we'll announce who the presenters will be and what the topic will be. So again, thank you for joining us. Thank you for interest in this issue. I'm going to turn it over to my colleague and board member, Jan Budart, who will introduce tonight's guest. Jan?
Oh, hi, Al, and thank you very much for coming. It's lovely to see people here and old friends and new people. I want to introduce Justin Nobel. I can't even remember how I ran into his book, but I think I was intrigued by the title, Petroleum-238, which is a takeoff on uranium-238, and I thought, So I read the book, and I was very, very intrigued by something that we sort of all knew, that oil and gas leaves radiation in the atmosphere, in the soil, in the water, but it's not a well-known thing. And I have a T-shirt that says, coal waste is hazardous waste. But it turns out that by law, it's not hazardous waste. So whether it is or not, it has nothing to do with it because the law says it's not. And this was a very important thing that was elucidated in this book by Justin that I didn't really understand why. Anyway, he writes on science and the environment for US magazines, investigative sites, and literary journals. His work has been published in the Best American Science and Nature Writing, which is a publication, and Best American Travel Writing. Just a minute, I'm reading this. Oh, in 2020, Rolling Stone magazine's story, America's Radioactive Secret, won an award for long-form writing with the National Association of Science Writers and inspired this book. And he's going to be showing you the cover of his book when he presents the slides. Justin's writing has helped lead to lawsuits, academic research, public dialogue, and has been taught at Harvard's School of Public Health. So I hope you very much enjoy meeting Justin Nobel tonight, hearing about his book, and any new stuff that's been coming out since he wrote the book. So now I'm turning it over to Justin, and thank you very much for being here all, and especially thank you to Justin. So go ahead, Justin.
Thank you, Jan, and thank you, Dave. Really appreciate the opportunity to speak, and thank you all for attending. It's an exciting crowd. I just spoke at a college in Connecticut to students, writing students, and which is always exciting because I think, I am a writer, I'm a science writer, so science is part of it, but words are a big part. But the science background isn't necessarily there in all these students to really go into depth on some of these topics. But with this crowd, I think there is, and that gives me a chance, I think, to bring up some really important and interesting issues. And Jen, you set the stage well. There's policy issues involved here, and there's also a lot of there's science that has been done that no one really has paid much attention to. There's science ongoing that is really interesting that I think it's important to highlight. And then there's definitely the opportunity for a lot of important new science on this topic, and new policy. So I will dial up this presentation and we will get started. Okay. Okay, super. So there is the cover of the book. This is I work a lot with an amazing photographer, Julie Dermansky. You see her name cited there. She's based in Southern Louisiana. And this photo is not photoshopped as many people think it is. This is an actual home in, I believe it's the Moreau refinery in Southern Louisiana. This is a part of Louisiana known as Cancer Alley. And you actually have homes this close to petrochemical development and oil refineries. And then, of course, a really great designer did the interesting display in the sky. But people live really close to these facilities, and the emissions are tremendous. There's a lot of emissions at a facility like this, and it's not necessarily radioactivity is not necessarily a primary concern, but I'll present to you at the end of the talk some new research on this very issue, radioactive emissions at oil refineries. But that's the book. You can pick it up. If they don't have it at a local bookstore, you certainly can ask them to order it. It's distributed through a provider of books that all bookstores use. And it's also available on the traditional online channels, Amazon, bookshop.org, Barnes and Noble. The book was set to be published with Simon & Schuster, a big, exciting publisher based in New York City. Simon & Schuster last year was purchased by KKR, a notorious oil and gas owning private equity firm. Yeah, right. It's the way of the world. But that was really untenable given the nature of this book. So I pulled the book from them. And in the end, we published it ourselves, which I think gives us a much more kind of punk rock way to get it out, like giving talks like this. Simon & Schuster, didn't seem to care about, certain outreach pathways. So I'm excited. Okay, I'm starting just with this quote. This is just a really simple way to reframe what is happening with oil and gas development. We can imagine the fuels, the oil, which still runs much of the world, natural gas, that little blue flame that cooks food. But there's something else happening. Essentially, what you're doing is taking an underground radioactive reservoir and bringing it up to the biosphere where it can interact with people and the environment. And I start with this because I think when you say oil field radioactivity, the initial thought is like, well, are they bringing in radioactive waste? What's happening here? No, it's actually quite simple. We live on a radioactive planet. You all are probably well aware of that. Many people aren't. And when you pull materials from deep underground up to the surface, you're inherently going to deal with that problem. Now, with oil and gas, you deal with it in multiple ways. There's multiple waste streams. This is just a breakdown of the book. And I don't know if this is necessarily too important right now. We can come back to this, but the book really is, as much as it is a science exploration through this topic, it's a journey across America. It's like a scientific road trip through how this problem is playing out in oil fields all across the country. And I think, if you're into science, certainly you'll appreciate it. But even if you are a fan of, road trip books like Travels with Charlie or On the Road, I think there's an element of the book that will be exciting to you. Okay, but going back to to the pathways that oil field radioactivity is brought to the surface. So really simple diagram done with very simple tools on the left. just showing the difference between an unconventional well, what we refer to as a fracked well on the right, and on the left, a conventional well. Oil field radioactivity has been an issue well before what we call modern fracking, or what I refer to as modern fracking, because fracking has been around for some time, but the technology being implemented now has come to be known as fracking. Oilfield radioactivity was always a problem. Something new that fracking adds to the picture is the shales that are being accessed are radioactive in themselves. We are accessing, in many instances, with unconventional oil and gas development, black shales. And I'll present in just a moment some really interesting science going back decades to show that black shales tend to have elevated levels of uranium-238 and thorium-232. And so going to the list on the right, that becomes a problem with what's referred to as drill cuttings. Drill cuttings, it's a simple idea. You dig a pit at the beach, you dig down into the earth, and you pull stuff up, and that stuff inherently has to go somewhere. And if you dig a very deep hole, which is what an oil and gas well is, you pull up a lot of stuff. You pull up a lot of drill cuttings. Now, traditionally, drill cuttings weren't necessarily problematic for the industry. When they're mixed with some of the chemicals used in the drilling process, that's called drilling muds, they can be reasonably toxic or quite toxic. They can be problematic, but drill cuttings are just what you're pulling up, the crushed dirt and rock. What accessing some of these black shales has done is turn drill cuttings into a radioactive problem. So that's number 4 on the list. But going up to number 1, I'm going to start with that. That's really where a lot of the industry's radioactive dilemma begins, and that's brine, also known as produced water, also known in the western part of the US as just salt water or water. Now, these are very deceptive terms. And as you'll see, despite these innocent names, brine is filled with toxic levels of salt, really highly elevated levels of salt, volatile organics such as the carcinogen benzene, heavy metals like lead and arsenic, and then also elevated levels of radium, which is a radioactive heavy metal. These trucks, and this is a photo from a worker, much of really a lot of different types of sources I rely on in my reporting, but oilfield workers are a very important source because they see things right up close, whereas some of the scientists studying this cannot get as close as them. So this is a certain part of the production process right before a well comes online. And this is a unconventional well, a fracked well. And recall, fracking involves copious amounts of water mixed with chemicals, mixed with often sand as a proppant. It's injected down into the earth. And then the intention is to crack open these difficult to access layers, such as black shales. You can drill down into a black shale vertically and you enter the shale, and you're not necessarily going to spout out oil and gas. Whereas if you drill into a conventional formation, the oil and gas is at pressure and oil can fountain out at the surface, like you imagine maybe in Western Texas. Gas can rush out in a roar. The unconventional plays are different, so you have to use this technique of fracking. Now, you inject all that down and you plug it. They plug the well, and then they're holding it at pressure. And then there's a moment when that well comes online, and that's referred to as the flowback period. And the material, some of what you sent down the well, so some of the chemicals mixed with water, mixed with sand, but also some of the brine that was in the formation is going to rush out, and it's an incredibly sloppy material. And this just shows the process of staging these brine trucks at a wellhead to be ready for this rush. Now, flowback is a separate material. It's alarming because it includes some of the fracking chemicals that will come back up to the surface. We don't even know what all these chemicals are. They have very complicated toxicities, and they're being mixed, of course, and then mixing in with some of the natural contaminants in brine. That waste stream does not last. At some point it will subside, but the brine will continue. The brine will go on. And this is just a slide to show that oilfield brine has always been a problem for the industry. So again, we're going back well before unconventional modern fracking. And this is a really fantastic article put out, you can see at the bottom, the Geological Survey Division of Michigan. And really it says it right there in the headline, salts of the earth, brine disposals, oil men's headache. And if you read through, they list a lot of contamination problems that I wish, regulators of today would pay more attention to, because it was all there decades ago, that if you spill oil field brine at the surface, if you try and dispose of it at the surface, which was the initial way of disposal for brine, you're going to have contamination. You'll contaminate waterways, and you'll contaminate drinking water, and there'll be property damage, and which leads to all sorts of legal liability issues too. So the problem has been known. And this, by the way, is before. This article does not mention radium or radioactivity. At this point, they were just concerned about the salts. And this, I always say, is biblical. There's many bad things you can do to someone's land, but if you salt someone's land, it's really a tragedy, because you are destroying its ability to be productive, destroying its ability to produce crops. And in the book, I feature a group from North Dakota called the Salted Lands Council, and they look after the tens of thousands of acres of farmland across North Dakota that has been destroyed by oil field brine spills or just inappropriate storage of oil field brine going back decades. And while let's say that here. So while we're on the topic of brine, how did they traditionally dispose of brine? Brine was just disposed of, and this is very important to remember going forward. Cheapest and easiest, and the cheapest and easiest way was just discharge it into an unlined pit right beside the well, or even just into a stream or creek or field. So it makes sense that in states like North Dakota, we've had oil and gas development for many years, there's contamination issues. But I think it's really important to lay out the size of this waste stream, how much brine. Many wells produce more brine than they do oil and gas, making, brine really the product there, and these other things are essentially byproducts. Brine is coming up, and often a well over time will generate more and more brine, less and less oil or gas. Right now, across the US, the oil and gas industry produces about 3 billion gallons of brine a day. That's 1 trillion gallons a year. If you took that 1 trillion gallons of brine generated each year by the oil and gas industry, and you put it into your standard sized oil barrel, which is like waist high, and you stack those barrels atop one another, you would reach the moon and back almost 28 times. So this is an incredible waste stream. Leave it here for a moment. And the industry has never had a good idea on how to deal with it. They've never solved that problem. Again, cheapest and easiest means of disposal. It used to be unlined pits, creeks and streams, bays, bayous, anywhere just to run it. We have different disposal techniques now, which I'll get into, but the main takeaway here is just the copious nature of this waste stream. And it just keeps coming and coming. They don't want the brine, they want the oil and gas, and yet they're saddled with this continuous waste stream, which has some really concerning contaminants and complex geochemically, which becomes important later on. So now getting to radium, into the world that a lot of you all know about. I usually talk a bit about the Radium Girls just because it is relevant and fascinating, and that lets me talk about Dr. Harrison Martland, who an incredible medical examiner in Newark, New Jersey, who really cracked the code on the Radium Girls using some interesting science. But you all maybe know at least part of that story, so I won't go deep into that. But the main takeaway is a number of different radioactive elements to be worried about on Earth, but radium is really one of the important ones because it's moderately soluble, it flows with water. We have the history of the Radium Girls, and so we do have regulations around this concerning element. EPA has a safe drinking water limit for radium. They're looking at the two primary forms of concern, or isotopes, radium-226 and radium-228, in the drinking water limit, and it's 5 picocuries per liter. Now, you don't have to go too much above that to actually meet EPA's definition of radioactive waste. And this becomes important. What is radioactive waste? And these definitions, by the way, rely on the tables within the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, 20 CFR Part 3. I'm forgetting the exact label. Some of you may be familiar with them, but EPA is is leading their rules to these same tables. They're different for each element, but for radium-226 and radium-228, 60 picocuries per liter is this limit at which they define a liquid waste stream as radioactive. And again, that's really important because, you know, we can say, oh, there's some radioactivity in brine. Well, is it radioactive waste? Well, yes, by EPA's definition, it absolutely is, because you see below the average levels in the Marcellus, there we have average level of radium-226 in the Marcellus, average 8,344 picocuries per liter. Average level of radium-228. Radium-226 is often higher in many formations, 986. You add those together, the average radium levels in Marcellus brine are 9,330. This is according to the Pennsylvania Department of Environmental Protection's own reports, their own data. Can be as high as 28,500. And again, 60 is the limit at which EPA defines radioactive waste. So going back to this photo, these trucks are all, this is the Marcellus. Nowhere is the radium, according to the Department of Environmental Protection in Pennsylvania's data, lower than 60. These trucks are all inherently carrying radioactive waste. And yet none of them will be labeled to indicate that. And they often just have a very innocent word, brine, on the side of them. Here, this is data that I put together from a variety of pre-existing sources, but this is just seeking out what are the radium levels in brine across the United States. Now, it's a tricky thing to do because in many places, amazingly, there is no data. Oklahoma, for example, an oil and gas state for over 100 years, I could not find a single paper that lists radium levels in the oil field brine, which is it's such an important thing to know because the liquid is being stored and sloshed and transported across the state and even turned into products. And I asked the Oklahoma Corporation Commission, which is the regulator in that state, and they don't even know. They could provide me no data on radium levels. Now, other states, there is data. There's never a lot of data, which is why it's hard to create an average. So I just took the high level that I could find in these reports. But you can see, again, always above 60. In the Gulf, just over 3,000 picocuries per liter. Denver, Julesburg, a really booming play in Colorado, lower, but still well above 60. Bakken, a very big play right now in North Dakota, reasonably high, 6,760 picocuries per liter. And the average, by the way, in the Bakken was, it's not like the average is, 500. The average is often a little bit lower. The average, I think, in the Bakken was in the 4,000 to 5,000 range. So looking at the high level does give you some indication. An important note there in Ohio, that's a conventional formation, again, predating fracking, and still you have this high point of radium in the brine at 9,600. Now, this becomes concerning because in Ohio and many other states, they use this practice and have been using it for decades of applying oil field brine to roads in an attempt to melt snow and ice and keep down dust. Well, you're lacing roads with a radium-rich waste stream. And then Michigan, the Antrim Formation, quite high. And then again, the Marcellus, like I said, the highest of all the formations with data that I have seen, and 28,500. Okay, so what do we do now with the brine? What does the United States do with the brine? We don't just discharge it into unlined pits. We have moved beyond that. 96% of the oil field brine, those 28 lines of barrels to the moon and back, will be disposed of at injection wells. Injection wells may sound like a well-organized and complex industrial facility. Perhaps it's regulated by a program run by EPA called the Underground Injection Control Program. But really, this is a deep hole in the ground that is drilled to a certain layer regarded as the target formation, a porous layer such as a sandstone or limestone. And the idea is you can cram in this waste into this porous layer and it will hold it, and there's an impermeable layer above and below, and it's not going to leak out. Now, I think you know, even asking like kindergartners if that makes sense, they would tell you it doesn't, it sounds fishy. I was always skeptical of this process, and I'll present some science going back, you know, going back years to show that there's no scientific merit behind this idea. Absolutely none. And yet it's used across the country. It's used to take 96% of this copious waste stream. But this is just to show the regulatory failure. Again, this truck just says residual. At the right, you can see the word brine. Again, we went over the radium levels. You also are going to have heavy metals in there, benzene, and potentially some of the fracking chemicals mixed in if it has flowback. So, and here it is going through downtown Burnsville, Ohio. And here's an injection well that is on the edge of a shopping plaza, and this is Cambridge, Ohio. And you can literally sit at Taco Bell, which I've done with workers who drive these trucks. You can sit at Taco Bell and you can look out the window and you can watch the trucks inject brine, which makes it seem not of concern, or you can refer to it as radioactive fracking waste, which is, you know, it's all about language. But you can watch that right from Taco Bell. It's absolutely stunning. Okay, but there's something happening here that becomes even more worrisome for the industry and ends up concentrating radioactivity. And this is really, it's quite a simple, you know, science on the surface. You just think of like a strong cup of coffee, coffee that you maybe used a French press process to brew. So you've got a lot of sediment, and you let that cup of coffee sit for a little bit, and there's going to be a little bit of sludge on the bottom, like a little skein of sediment. Brine is a very sediment-rich liquid. It has a lot of suspended solids, and radium, arsenic, these heavy metals, lead, these are just solids, right? So if you have brine in a tank, here we have a truck, which is just a tank on wheels, and on the right you have a wellhead in Colorado. For people who don't know the oil field, you might see these tanks and imagine they're all oil. Well, some of them are oil if it's an oil producing well, but invariably some of them will also contain brine. And at the bottom of that brine tank, you're going to be accumulating a sludge. Now, if you have these reasonably to quite high radium levels in brine, you can expect that sludge to be even more concentrated in radium and radium's daughters, and it is. Sludge is well known by EPA to really be wildly radioactive. And I don't know if I listed the numbers here, but this is right here on EPA's own webpage defining radioactive oil field waste, or what they call T-norm, technologically enhanced, naturally occurring radioactive materials. And they lay out a number of 400,000 picocuries per gram for radium levels. And that is really, that's for scale, sorry. For sludge, I think they have found radium to be as high as 700,000 picocuries per gram. I mean, this is an astonishing level. Background is around 1 picocurie per gram, and at 5 picocuries per gram above background, so if background's often 1, that would be about 6 picocuries per gram. EPA limits on radium apply, for example, for like cleaning up uranium mill sites or Superfund sites. Some of you may be familiar with that. So we are miles above that when it comes to sludge. It's not always that high. It can be that high. And also levels of some of radium's daughters are very high in sludge, such as lead-210, polonium-210, a very concerning radioisotope. And this is happening in all of these trucks, in all of these tanks, especially in plays where you have a very gunky brine, where you have a lot of salts and metals in the brine. The Marcellus is certainly one of them. Now you have this massive waste stream, and we live in this, you know, capitalist society, and problems often get turned into things of investment, right? And this is exactly what is happening right now across the oil and gas industry, not in the United States, but other countries. You have investors who are offering these like amazing solutions to deal with this wastewater, and they're offering opportunities for investments. And again, you just read the titles, it says it there. What is the outlook for US produced oil field water, and what will it mean for investors? Now, this growing dirty water problem should create opportunities for investments through service companies which treat, recycle, or dispose of this dirty produced water. So we're going to go and see now what these companies look like that, quote, treat, recycle, or dispose of this dirty produced water. two different examples that I've done a lot of reporting around. On the left, we have a very savvy facility, at least on paper. It was a project of Antero Resources, which is a powerful Colorado energy company. And then Veolia, which is a multinational wastewater and energy company based in Paris, France, multi-billion-dollar company. And they built a $255 million fracking wastewater treatment facility in northern West Virginia. That's the heart of the Marcellus and Utica natural gas play, which is the most booming natural gas play in the entire United States. And they were going to solve, just like you saw on that slide, the dirty water problem. They were really excited. This was going to be a green thing for the industry. There's some incredible quotes they gave where they describe this as being the best environmental project for the US oil and gas industry in a generation. They were going to treat and clean the brine. Now, again, you can use sort of like child logic of like, well, if you have a thing that has a lot of concerning contaminants and you're going to try and remove the contaminants, even if you are successful, you are concentrating those contaminants, right? And there's an incredible American Petroleum Institute paper that talks to just that point. Be wary if you're trying to treat oil field waste, because even if you can do it, you are inherently concentrating that waste stream and you're concentrating that radioactivity. What are you going to do with that? But there's geochemical considerations that are problematic. And often I have discovered in the Marcellus and Utica area, at least, where you have these very high radium and salt levels in the brine, companies, even ones that spend $250 million, have not been able to successfully treat the brine. And so what happens is they come in with a lot of gusto. They have investors. They say it's going to be this great thing. They tell their workers that they're working at these environmentally friendly facilities that are cleaning up the oil and gas industry, and they fail after usually a couple of years. And they don't just fail, they leave behind incredible contamination. So now we go to the facility on the right. It's another fracking waste treatment facility, also in West Virginia. And this one, though, I had a rare access because it was just an abandoned facility. There was no fences, there was no trespassing signs. And I was able to visit with, on the right, that's Jill Hunkler, an Ohio organizer and activist, and Dr. Yuri Gorby, who's from West Virginia and used to work with the Department of Energy. He has Geiger counter experience, spent years working with radioactivity at Hanford in Washington. And this just was one of the most terrible things I've uncovered in my reporting. Essentially, they're trying to treat fracking wastewater. So again, that just means brine and flowback. These complex waste streams I've been talking about. You have high radium levels. You have other concerning contaminants. It turns out that the salt alone makes makes this a very technically challenging to treat this waste stream. The salt alone makes a lot of the processes you might use to pull contaminants out challenging, if not impossible, or just costing way more money than these places were willing to spend. And the result is a shuttered facility. Now, this is West Virginia. I totally get it. It's this weird abandoned facility, and it literally became a party spot for kids. So you have kids hanging out. There's a soiled mattress over in part. I don't know if that is shown. There's graffiti all over the place. There's beer cans. There's used condoms scattered around. They had a big bonfire pit right here in the parking lot. And then we tested, and the levels were just absolutely frightening. And eventually, I wrote an article in the EPA, ended up visiting, and right where Dr. Gorby is testing, they found levels in the soil of like 3.1 milliroentgens per hour, which is above Nuclear Regulatory Commission limits for workers who are, trained to deal with radioactivity. But then we also tested, of course, you want to know, well, what are the radioactive elements that are generating that radioactivity? So we sent samples in to a former radiological analysis site, and radium turned up at 5,072 picocuries per gram. And again, general background around the world is in the range of 1 or 1 to 2. So we're dealing with exceptionally high levels. And in this case, you actually had kids partying in it. It's a massive failure of the regulatory system. This is looking inside a different type of facility. Again, you think of this industry has to keep moving forward. People are still using the products. They have this waste, and they've developed their own diabolical kind of capitalist structure of dealing with it. And one of the problems they run up against is the sludge is so radioactive. So even a facility like the ones here, even if they're working correctly, they would be accumulating all this radium-rich sludge that they pulled from the brine. So what do they do with that? That ends up going to a facility called a downblending facility. And what they're doing there is taking this really radioactive oil field sludge, and we know the levels now from sites like that. It could be around 5,000 picocuries per gram radium. That's way too high to take to a local landfill. Many local landfills in this area and around the country have detectors. This has nothing to do with the oil and gas industry. It has to do with, people often trying to sneak radioactive stuff into landfills. So many of them have detectors, and loads at that level would set those and did set those detectors off. So the industry should be taking this waste to low-level radioactive waste disposal sites, such as the facility in Clive, Utah, operated by Energy Solutions. That's very far away from West Virginia. It's very expensive to transport things, especially heavy things, long distances, and it's very expensive to dispose of stuff at sophisticated low-level radioactive waste disposal facilities. So the industry comes up with this trick, and the trick is downblending. They're going to mix the radioactive oil field sludge with less radioactive items like lime and coal ash, and even ground up corn cobs. It sounds absurd, but these are just, items that are cheaply available in much of oil and gas country. And the intention is to, of course, they can't make the radioactivity disappear, but they're trying to lower it enough such that these loads can then be taken to a local landfill and get into local landfills. Many stories, by the way, of even, and this facility is just, you see how sloppy they are here. This whole process is really just a nightmare. The workers do not know that they're dealing with radioactive materials. They are not aware of even simple things like, wear gloves, wear masks. They're dusty environments. So there's just exposure from a variety of different sources. You have what's called ground shine and cloud shine, because you have this dusty environment. So you would have, gamma rays bouncing up off the floor, zinging off the ceiling, and then dust, which is actually being inhaled. And this is the most concerning, I believe, exposure pathway here, because they're working in these environments maybe 12 to 16 hours a day, 5 to 7 days a week, with no PPE. Also getting covered in the sludge. So in one instance, we were able to actually get the boots worn by a worker at one of these facilities. They were caked in sludge. We had the sludge again tested, and radium was like 87 picocuries per gram. Not as high as 5,000, but these are boots that could be taken home. The sludge is also covering their work clothes. That could be washed in the family washing machine or at a local hotel. And 87 picocuries per gram radium is still quite high and still well above the EPA's limit for cleanup, for example, at uranium mills or Superfund sites. And here it is accreted to, a worker's clothing, and which is in intimate contact with their body and has the potential to be brought home to their family. So this shows another concerning trend. Actual transformation of oil field waste into consumer products. This is an actual product that is still being used in parts of Ohio. When I learned of it, it actually was being sold on the shelves at Lowe's, the national hardware chain. And in this case, again, we have good data. The Ohio Department of Natural Resources went in, actually tested the product. They picked up jugs of this stuff, and they found radium levels, and you can see it right here. 2,491 picocuries per liter. So again, we're well above the drinking water limit. Now you're not drinking this stuff, but we're also above this important limit where you define a liquid waste stream as radioactive. And there it was being sold on the shelves of a hardware store with this claim, safe for environment and pets. Okay. And again, this isn't, it sounds absurd, but you must think of the bind that the industry faces. And the best way to get rid of a waste stream is to do this magical trick and say it's not a waste stream, it's a product. And this, of course, has been done with other wastes, including in the nuclear industry and with sewage sludge. It's kind of a well-known tactic. I imagine there's a lot of questions at this point, and I just want to focus on one more thing, which I think was alluded to by Jan and is really important. It's a reason a lot of this is possible. There's regulatory failures kind of up and down, but a really important one occurred in the late 1970s and early 1980s. We have, in this moment in U.S. history, going back to the 60s and 70s, a real environmental awakening. And there's the Clean Water Act, the Clean Air Act, and the country is really making a concerted effort to clean up its environment, make the waters drinkable, make the air breathable. Now, the law that was going to deal with solid waste was referred to as the Resource Conservation and Recovery Act, and it was really well-meaning, and it was going to solve the solid waste disposal problem in the country. Landfills were highly problematic. They were like these neighborhood things which were leaking all over the place. Waste was being dumped into rivers, into the ocean. We need to control solid waste. So it's good, well-intended. But you face a big problem. There's a lot of different types of solid waste. What is going to be regarded as hazardous waste that we really have to monitor closely and track closely, and what is going to be non-hazardous waste, like household trash, that we maybe don't have to keep as closely guarded, we don't have to dispose of in as secure facilities, etc. Now, if you're an industry that produces quite a lot of waste, like the coal industry or the oil and gas industry, health aside, science aside, you have a major economic incentive to make sure that your waste is defined as non-hazardous. And that's exactly what the oil and gas industry has been able to do. And they've been able to keep this exemption stunningly up until the present moment. And there's absolutely no sign that they're going to lose it, despite there being quite a lot of scientific evidence showing that they should lose it. But right here, you see some of the EPA's own words. If you actually were to label the waste, and remember, we're again talking about sludge, that even though the EPA knows oil field sludge can have radium well into the thousands of picocuries per gram, but it's non-hazardous, and they say it would cause a severe economic impact on the industry, on production in the US. It'd be a permitting burden. There'd be short-term strains on capacity. Essentially, we wouldn't even have enough places to dispose of it. We wouldn't have enough people to deal with its disposal, and it would really sink the industry when it came to economic costs. So for these reasons and others, we need to label it as non-hazardous. Now, one ramification of that is you can get a worker covered in sludge that's 87 picocuries per gram radium, and that's a non-hazardous material, although of course the laws of science, as it's on their skin or breathing or being breathed in, says otherwise. But that's a problem. Another problem, and I'll just cut to this one slide, is that it can actually be imported, and it has been imported into the United States. This is a stunning facility. I wrote a whole article on that, and it makes up an important part of the book. This is a facility in West Texas. Now, amazingly, they have an interesting situation. They have a legitimate permit from the Texas Railroad Commission. That's the environmental regulator in that state, to dispose of oil field waste into a salt cavern. There really is a salt cavern there. The Department of Energy has deemed salt caverns as the most appropriate place for the disposal of oil field waste. Now, the problem is much of the oil field waste is very gunky. It's solid, it's sludge, or it's scale, mineral scale that accumulates on pipes, or it's adhered so tightly to metal that it's literally like this kind of scale cake bits of metal, pipes. And how do you get that stuff down a hole? You use a process called slurification, which is, again, massively technically challenging. What you see here is, or appears to be, quite a lot of unprocessed oil field waste that has been accumulated on the surface in various ways, being kept in various types of containers, because it appears as if the facility has not been able to inject it all into the salt cavern. I did have a whistleblower who came out and gave me their view on this, which is that this facility was just in over their head with waste. They can't inject it all, and they've got a really great game going here where they can charge high prices. They don't have to actually dispose of it appropriately. And what you see is this: the company is very litigious, all sorts of issues with that, with even taking this photo. They tried to sue us for that. But the big takeaway in terms of the exemption is they actually asked the EPA, hey, we've got this appropriate facility for the disposing of oil field waste. We want to take in radioactive oil field waste from other countries. Can we do that? EPA looked at the Benson and Bevel Amendments exemption, what I just went over, and they said, yes, you actually can do that because this waste is non-hazardous. You can import it into the United States, and the first load came aboard a Singapore Airlines cargo jet. Radium was like 2,095 peak carries per gram. It was in an appropriately secured barrel with a lock on it, but needless to say, that's you know, I mean, it came with like, who knows what else was on that plane, pianos and dog carriers or something, I don't know. It's another real failure of the US's regulatory laws on this. And there's a lot of other interesting pathways, but I want to open it up for questions because I think for many people it's new material and people may have some good ones. So let's take a break for just a moment. And I'll leave the screen open because I can move forward throughout the slide and maybe people will lead me to some of the other slides. But yeah, happy to hear what people have to say at this point.
Thank you very much, Justin. So we do have people, I want to explain how Connie already understands how to raise your hand. You go to the bottom of your screen and there's a little heart that says react, and you click on that heart and it says raise hand. And then when you are through asking your question, you click again and you lower your hand. So I appreciate it if you lower your hand. Otherwise, I have to figure out, I have to go to the list of participants and lower your hand. We allow you to have one question and a follow-up. So, but what we don't want is a series of questions, and we want you to be careful not to co-opt the time of the speaker by asking too many questions or getting into a discussion with the speaker. So, gee, we've got 1, 2, 3, 4, 5 people with their hands raised, and I'm going to start out and ask Connie Klein to unmute herself and ask her question.
Hello.
Oh, by the
did
way,
you-
Connie, I just want to announce that you are from Ohio, and this is one of the places in Ohio that I'm sure nuclear waste is not a stranger to Ohio. I'm sorry, Connie, please go ahead.
This was fascinating. I learned some stuff. We're very familiar with Aqua Salina. And interestingly, the Ohio Department of Natural Resources banned spreading brine on Ohio, for example, the turnpike. But it's fair game every place else. I was wondering if you're familiar with a person that I just learned about last week named Stephen Moore.
I don't believe so. What do
Okay.
they?
Well, he's apparently an owner of Veolia. Is that how you pronounce it?
Oh, Veolia. Yeah.
Yeah. And he was just appointed to the newly created Ohio Nuclear Development Authority. He has, I never heard of him, but he's
Wow.
a giant in this industry, in the nuclear industry. He's a very dangerous man, is how I would
Looking it up now.
yeah.
Veolia is one of the most, I mean, I don't want to use the word savvy because that's complimentary. You know, the way they dealt with me as a journalist was really crafty, deceptive, and just really frightening. I mean, they essentially were shocked that I wasn't telling their, line about this facility. And they even gave some revealing things like, well, usually with journalists, we talk with them and we know what their story is going to be beforehand. And I'm like, no, this is investigative journalism. I'm still learning. You want to like, but it was revealing as to how they operate. And I think this makes sense. I mean, they plant their people on important commissions. They are and you're right, it is frightening because they, that position has control. But no, I'm with you here. I'm following it. Yeah, it is worrisome what you said.
Well, thank you. This was very interesting.
Okay, our next questioner is Sandy Greer. Would you please, go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks so much. So, good evening, Justin. Honestly, this information about radioactivity in the oil and gas industry is totally new and horrifying to me. And I have been doing research for 12 years on the deep burial of radioactive waste in Canada. And there's very shortly, coming up in a few days, is a local rural vote in Ontario, where I live in Canada, a small community being given the power to decide for all Canadians whether they want a deep burial site for high level radioactive waste. And I could tell you more about that later, but my question is, have you done research on imports from Canada, for example, from Alberta, to the United States for in regard to the oil and gas industry? And are you intending to do any research on the Canadian side? And I just thank you so much for your excellent journalism.
Yeah, it's a good question. So I'm just I'm gonna dial let's quickly go to the article that photo is from, because yeah, there were loads from Alberta that went to that facility. So we know, there we go. I'm just getting the actual article up. Canada's oil fields are certainly generating brine, just like all oil fields are. That means inherently there's drill cuttings, there's drilling waste, there's radioactive sludge. I have not been able to focus as closely as I have in Canada as the United States. Early on, there's some interesting things that came up in British Columbia and Alberta, and a lot of the companies operating, especially in northern US states like North Dakota, are Canadian companies. So I know there's a landfill company called Tervita that's involved in oil field waste. They're out of Canada, I believe. There's a company called Secure, which has a lot of oil and gas waste facilities in North Dakota. They're out of Canada. So they're involved. And nowhere have I found it to be a smooth and clean process. I spent some time in the Netherlands, where it looks better than anywhere else, but it's still highly problematic. One thing happening in the Netherlands, for example, is they're dumping the brine right into the North Sea. Millions and millions of gallons every year, not just Netherlands, Norway, the UK, it's going right into the ocean, which again makes economic sense. You're out in the ocean. It'd be a lot of money to ship this to land. They do inject some of it into the sea, which is still problematic, but a lot of it is just dumped right into the ocean. And this is, supposedly one of the most green countries on earth. So Canada, I would have a lot of questions. At one point, I think the Walrus put out a good story on British Columbia and this issue, but I haven't seen anyone do, and it's hard to do this like a super really deep dive on what's happening in Canada. But if you wanted to look, the questions to ask are, where is the brine going? And if they say they're treating it, let's go to those facilities. What do they look like? And where is the sludge or sediment or gunk or tank bottoms that those facilities inherently generated? Where is that going? If it's going to a landfill, then let's go to that landfill and let's look at, where is that landfill discharging its leachate? Is it into a river? Is it into a sewage treatment plant that can't appropriately deal with these complicated waste streams? And just to answer the other part of your question, let's just search this, because I haven't read this article in a while, but I know there's a little section on Canada.
Could I look it up on Google?
Yeah. It's just the article is right here at top. The title, Where Does All the Radioactive Fracking Waste Go? There's some more photos that was sent by a whistleblower, and I'm just trying to find these lines. Some more photos from it. Okay, here we go. Importing radioactive waste. Lotus's first international shipment was 65.5 barrels of soil and sludge that arrived from Alberta, Canada, November 1999. The files we obtained from the Railroad Commission, again, that's the Texas regulator, reveal more than 450 barrels of waste from Canada between 1999 and 2004. Now, this is often what you see in the data. Like, it doesn't mean at 2004, Canada stopped producing radioactive oil field waste. It just means they may have found a cheaper place to send it. And you know, the trail for me ends there. But certainly, if it wasn't going here, it was going somewhere else. But you know, it could take a considerable amount of reporting to figure out where. Although I'd be happy to work with a Canadian journalist on that, because once you know the tools of how to dig into this, it becomes a little easier in the next place.
Great, thank you so much.
Okay, thank you very much for the answer, Justin. And we're calling on Kristen Schrader. Her last name is Schrader Frechette or Frechette, which is unusual and interesting. But anyway, unmute yourself, please, Kristen, and ask your question. You need to unmute. We can't hear you. Go to the bottom left of your screen and click on the microphone.
So
very
sorry,
good.
Justin. Thanks so much for your presentation. It was absolutely excellent. Very good job analytically, as well as handling the science and the quantities. The first thing I wanted to know was what those picocuries look like relative to what natural background is. So you just did a fantastic job, and I'm sorry about you sooner, because I've been writing books and articles on nukes and nuke waste for a good 40 years. So you deserve to be heard everywhere. I'm going to do what I can to promote you. Two really quick questions. Why don't sludge workers use PPE? I would think that EPA, OSHA, or NRC, one of those groups would have to be involved, particularly with the workers. And which states are most infamous for importing this oil field rad waste, sludge, and whatever?
Yeah, both really good questions. Thank you. So the waste, remember, is heavy, especially if it's a solid, if it has a lot of liquids in it, and they don't want to ship it far. So in terms of like, yeah, where are the problems? You start in the oil field states themselves, and usually a treatment facility. And again, these are the really worrisome facilities that are trying to treat oil field waste, and they might be branded as the best facilities. We're greening the industry, that sort of thing. But these are the places to look, because this is where you're going to end up concentrating the brine. And they are often located not far from the oil field. They may be just outside, they may be in it. So in the US, for example, in Ohio, and where I've done a lot of my reporting, and I'll go back to the photo of that slide of this facility I'm about to talk about. In Ohio, I discovered that, so this facility is featured here in a couple of the photos. It's called Austin Master Services. It's in Martins Ferry, Ohio. They were actually using workers recently released from prison. Many of them had drug issues, and they were using them at this facility to do this really concerning job of down blending radioactive waste, which means scooping it around with shovels. There's a picture of one guy in one of these photos with a hand broom. Often you're using like a little bulldozer. They are not informed of the risks. They're getting paid $15 an hour. This is a group that's desperate, of course, for work. They've just come out of prison. Employment is hard. You want to help a group like this re-enter society, and yet the industry is absolutely manipulating and taking advantage of their desperation and giving them these jobs. And I know that because I also in the book talked to people who ran these sort of prison recruitment operations, and they say it right outright. You know, who is the best worker at a facility like this? We don't want someone with a master's degree. We don't want someone who knows what radium is. We want the worker who just got out of prison, has a drug problem, and is completely desperate. And if we tell them to jump in this sludge pit, they're going to do it. Now, so this is getting at the answer to your question. They are told it's not a problem. They are told that there's no more radioactivity than what's in their cell phone. Yeah, we have these masks, you can use it if you want, but no one uses it. You know, only pussies use it. And that becomes part of the issue too, this kind of toxic masculinity culture. You know, when workers describe to me, that is also preyed upon. So, you know, like these contests of who can stay in the tank. Tank cleaning becomes a really dangerous job. Who can stay in the tank the longest without, you know, like, you know, wussing out and leaving. And so they're actually incentivized to almost like who can withstand this harm more. And they still don't even know about the radioactivity. These all add up to the reasons why these guys are not wearing PPE and not even washing their hands, for example. So, you know, you're covered with sludge, smoking a cigarette. And again, we go back to this, you know, masculinity thing. There's photos I have of people on social media, and they do this like to show to their girlfriend. They're covered in sludge and they're like lighting up a cigarette. And it's supposed to be like kind of the marble man, like I'm a tough guy and here I am at work. And they are doing a very hard job, but they're not aware that there's a radioactivity content to that waste that's all over their face and on their fingers and, you know, providing an ingestion pathway. So there's a lot of reasons. Some of them are sociological for how that's allowed to happen. OSHA has absolutely failed on this issue. OSHA visited this facility and did not cite them at all for this issue. There's like an absurd citation for like a trip and fall or something. So OSHA's allowed this to happen. I've dealt with a lot of the US government agencies. None has been more evasive in their answers than OSHA. You know, EPA, at least I can correspond with them and they investigate often when I write about places. OSHA's really been a letdown. And OSHA could, you know, OSHA could act on this issue. And that's, you know, that all becomes part of the problem and how things are enabled to move forward. As another really important whistleblower in the book says, there's no bumper sticker for this. There's no politician carrying it in a briefcase. And that is important too. And that's accurate. You know, this isn't, we're talking about PFAS now, which is great, and doing some important legislation around that. No one's talking about oilfield radioactivity, which means the industry doesn't have a strong incentive to change their ways.
Wow.
Thank
Thank
you.
you.
Thank you. And now I'm calling on Dave. Go ahead and ask your question.
Thanks. I got a two-parter here, but they kind of overlap. Through your research or, well, either through your research or other investigative means, with climate change coming, we have a situation where tornadoes are becoming more frequent. Now we have to add derechos to the list of high winds. And a lot of the pictures you've illustrated are facilities that are out in the middle of nowhere, but at the same time are very vulnerable. And my question is, are there standards for any of those storage casks or drums that are there that are monitored or upheld? And the second part of the question has to do with, did you do any research or have you encountered research on the examination of public health records or cancer registries in the counties around any of those facilities? Thanks.
Yeah, but again, both good questions. So I think the first question is getting at, you know, a lot of industry does have good standard practices when it comes to things like tank cleaning. I mean, even the American Petroleum Institute, if you look through some of their documents, they take difficult and dangerous jobs in the oil and gas industry quite seriously. And the training manuals might be really rigorous. Now, this isn't American Petroleum Institute, what I've lined up here. This is the International Association of Oil and Gas Producers, but they have, you'll see the title there on the right, they have like a 65-page report on managing excuse me, naturally occurring radioactive material in the oil and gas industry. On the left is a really powerful diagram, which is actually quite instructive, showing where there's a radioactive scale that will accumulate on certain pipes, including piping in natural gas plants, in compressor stations. You're not necessarily, I mean, you are at risk to some gamma if you're standing next to it. The diagram on the left shows that, but the major risk is if you open up the pipe. So again, this is a great report. It's a great guide. It has standards. Absolutely no one I've ever talked to in the oil and gas oil industry has seen these photos. And when they do see them, I mean, they freak out. I had one really memorable incident where I showed this very report and this very picture to a worker in Ohio, and they're like, holy shit. And they said, watch this. And they took a photo of it with their cell phone and they sent it to like 20 colleagues who were still in the industry. And immediately their phone was buzzing like continuously as their colleagues sent messages back being like, what the hell is that? Where'd you get that? So they have no idea. There might be good guidelines. There might be good, for example, tank cleaning is a task that the industry has really robust kind of procedures on. Even if the EPA visited, and again, I get this right from the worker who describes how they do this, and say, hey, how do y'all clean tanks? And what they do is they just print up some crap right off of YouTube. And here, sir, here's our tank cleaning manual. Here, ma'am, this is how we do it. Here's our brochure to show that our workers know about radiation. Great, check that off, and then they leave. And again, some of the sources, are really, you're dealing with a real cowboy culture. One of the best sources who has told me exactly how they evade regulation in instances like that, he used to be a bank robber. And so you're talking with people who, have made careers out of kind of deception and learning to cut corners. And so deceiving an EPA person who comes in and asks them for their, manuals is something that's just second nature to them. Now, the second part of the question, can you repeat the second part again?
Yeah, I was wondering if you encountered or researched either the county public health records or the cancer registries for the communities around there.
Yeah, let me see if I have. There's an amazing paper out of Canada, actually, out of Ontario, that looks, I'm not sure I included it in this presentation, but I can again draw it up. It looks at the radium levels in drinking water and incidence of Ewing sarcoma. And this is naturally occurring radium in this part of Ontario. And let's just see if I can find that really quickly. Let me go to Google Scholar, and his name is, I'm using my girlfriend's computer, so all my documents aren't uploaded, but we should be able to find this quickly. This is a very important paper, Murray Finkelstein, radium, Ewing sarcoma, Ontario. Okay, perfect. So this paper, not looking at an oil field setting, but applicable to the oil field. And the findings here are stunning. Essentially, Finkelstein, who was the epidemiologist in Ontario, so had access to good data, which is difficult. It's a huge thing to get access to the data you described. It sounds very easy. Well, can you look at cancer records? Like, I mean, that's actually illegal in some states. Governments in states that pollute a lot know that answers lie in the cancer data, and you would not imagine how hard it is to actually get your hands on the data or on the data in a way that is usable. There is a whole network to deceive people and stop researchers from getting that. Finkelstein had access to the data. It's not involving industry, so there's no kind of, power at B saying, don't look at this. He's simply looking at naturally occurring radium in drinking water and the risk of death from bone cancer. And what he found is that there is a statistically significant increase in bone cancers, including Ewing sarcoma, based on just very small increases in radium in drinking water, which is a stunning find. Now, he looked at this again and he didn't, and the finding on the second time wasn't the signal was not as powerful, but it didn't negate the first find. Amazingly, this research has not really been followed up that much. I think part of the reason is because it's so hard to get good data like this. But we now go to southwestern Pennsylvania, in the middle of oil and gas country in Pennsylvania, and there are many ways in Pennsylvania in which you have radium-rich effluent, and we know this again from data, going right into rivers that are used for drinking water. And we have a Ewing sarcoma crisis in southwestern Pennsylvania amongst teenagers. In the book, I profile the pitcher and catcher on the same high school baseball team. Both got Ewing sarcoma. One survived, one didn't. We have, again, this radium-rich waste stream, which is being spewed into the waterways all across Pennsylvania. And here we have important research saying that there is a statistically significant increase in Ewing sarcoma in connection with radium in drinking water, elevated levels. And yet it's no one in Pennsylvania has followed up on this research that I know of, and said, let's actually see and try and put the pieces together with this data. And it's a part of the reason, I think, is because it's very challenging to get what sounds like very simple, easily accessible data. I mean, I couldn't even get levels on a county by county basis of how many Ewing sarcoma cases there are. Often it takes activists literally going to PTA meetings all across the region saying whose kids have cancer and adding the numbers up themselves. And that's often how reporters learn things, but you're not going to get it from the state health agency, unfortunately.
Could I ask, the author of this is named Finkelstein, and you said Norman, but I sort of doubt that's his first name.
Oh, sorry, Murray. Murray is his first
Murray
name. Yeah.
Finkelstein. Finkelstein. Okay, because Norman is a completely different problem. Okay. Let's see. It looks like we're to Kathleen. Oh, Kathleen is on our board, and she is very important in keeping track of our books and helping Dave in the office. So I really want to thank Kathleen not only for the work she does, but for being here and having a question.
Thanks, Jan.
Mhm.
Justin, being a past science writer myself, I mean, you're just doing exceptional work with this, and this is so much of this is new information for me as well. It's just like, wow. So thank you so much for just the incredible work that you're doing. And I'm wondering, with all that you've been able to expose and are continuing to do, are you finding any legislators, any people in the regulatory offices that are starting to pay attention? Are you finding any people willing to start to champion this issue? Because it's just, I mean, it's just astounding, the level of contamination that is being just spread, and people having no idea. So I'm wondering, are you finding any allies? Are you waking people up who are starting to take this seriously and might be able to start regulating some of this?
Yeah, no, it's thank you. And great to connect with the fellow science writer. There are. So and it's very, again, you enter this world of sociology. So right here, I've put on the screen a slide that I didn't excuse me, I didn't present. It's from Oklahoma, where they actually spread drilling waste. Now, this is different than brine. Drilling waste is the sum of the drill cuttings, but also muds, what they call drilling muds, which are chemical enriched muds used in the drilling process. All sorts of contaminants. Radioactivity is not necessarily always an issue, but there's other contaminants in drilling waste. And in Oklahoma, and you can watch this happen, they take it right over to agricultural land, and they actually apply it to farmland. And they are under the impression that cows love land that has been applied with drilling waste. So Oklahoma, I think, is the antithesis of like paying attention. No politician there is paying attention. But this has been worked into the culture. And you can see a quote here, and this is someone who runs a company that does this. You know, of all the different ways to deal with oil field waste, I think land application means spreading drilling waste on farmland, is the best. This is what I tell people I go to church with. Wherever they put that black mud, that's where my cattle graze the hardest. And the grass that doesn't get the mud, they don't want it. And I got a check for 10 or 20,000. They get paid to apply this waste by the barrel. And I'm happy. Now I'm in touch with scientists in Oklahoma, and there's actually some great ones who, you know, debunk that there's no science to support this idea that it's good for crops and cows to spread drilling waste. And in Oklahoma, there is no one who on the legislative level who is critical. It's really an interesting example of like the brainwashing of an entire state. Now in Pennsylvania and Colorado and New Mexico, which are huge oil and gas states, you have some really good environmental advocacy groups, some good public health groups, and you do have some people paying attention. The best state when it comes to legislators paying attention is Pennsylvania. It's frustrating for me and a lot of other journalists right now to see this national dialogue as if like everyone in Pennsylvania loves fracking. Everyone in Pennsylvania does not love fracking. Most Pennsylvanians are actually against fracking, are well aware that it's harmful to health, to land, to water. And there's an entire group of Pennsylvania state legislators and representatives who rose to power specifically on holding accountable the oil and gas industry. And they are paying attention. One of them is State Senator Katie Muth, who actually proposed legislation within Pennsylvania to end the exemption that I described, end the oil field waste exemption. Now, that's a big task, and she doesn't necessarily have the coalition to do that now, but even having a hearing on that and hosting events about that, you know, helps raise awareness. So right now that group is small, but they are paying attention. In Ohio, again, it's a little bit more like Oklahoma. There's no legislator that I know of who is actually really following this and moving forward energetically on it. So it varies, but it matters. So just to give you an example of how it matters, just to have one person paying attention, State Senator Katie Muth, who I just mentioned in Pennsylvania, hosted an event with me, and oil field workers came, whistleblowing workers came. We did it at the state capitol, and she had another event with another reporter who writes on these issues, and they had workers present too, talking about the dangers of these plants. And so that, you know, puts something out there into the ethers that she is aware on this issue. Of course, she's received criticism for it, but there's this interesting pathway of courage. When whistleblowers come out, they come out to the people they know who actually give a damn. And they know State Senator Katie Muth does, because she took the risk of having a hearing on this. So a set of whistleblowers, and this is happening right now, and I'm writing about this right now, they came out to say, we work at a fracking waste treatment plant. We're reaching out to you because you had this hearing and we think you're going to care. We're trying to get someone's attention. No one's listening. And essentially, their story is that they work at a fracking waste treatment plant that was abandoned. A worker died in a really concerning way. The facility has left a waste all over, not so different from some of the photos you've seen of these other sites. But most concerning, this facility was turning the fracking waste into pool salts. They were actually making pool salts that are used sold across the country. And these workers are like legitimately concerned that kids all around America have been contaminated. It was sold at BJ's, Walmart's, Lowe's, and Katie actually responded. And the worker was so stunned because they thought, you know, you just reach out to someone who has power, and they got used to, like many of us do, to rejection. And Katie's really a nerd on this. So not only has she responded, she's helped now a group of more than a dozen workers get back pay that they were owed by their employer, and also has involved various, you know, regulatory agencies to assess this. And we're still trying to figure out exactly, you know, what was the nature of the contamination, what were the levels in the pool salts. I just sent a sample from a bag of pool salts to a radiological analysis lab. We're still figuring this out. But, you know, Katie is really a rare thing, but it shows you how powerful one person paying attention, you know, can make quite a ripple. So, yeah. And again, the narrative is different that we hear, you know, that no one in Pennsylvania thinks fracking is bad. It's not true.
Right. Well, and just a quick follow-up, because knowing that you're doing such important work with your journalism, aside from buying your book, which I'm about to do, how else can people support you in this really vital reporting work that you're doing?
Yeah, I mean, I think now, the book is a guide. It has a lot of the material I presented tonight in there, but in more of a story way, in a narrative way. And so I think it would be of interest people beyond just those with a deep interest in science or concerns about oil and gas. So definitely it's helpful to, spread awareness about it and also give talks like this. I mean, if there's groups, I know there was someone at least initially on the call from Nova Scotia, I believe, or Eastern Canada. I think talking to groups, especially in oil and gas areas, can often be a way to not just awake residents and public health advocates, but also shake out whistleblowers. And that is how we can really learn what's happening. And they have the most damning information. I mean, I can say this looks bad, this seems bad, but it's not until someone who works at the facility comes out and goes, oh, it's worse than you even thought. This is what's really happening. And so, yeah, if there's other places, other communities that are interested in having talks, I'm always up for that sort of thing, whether it's via Zoom or if possible, actually visiting communities in the real world too.
Thank you, Justin. So Katie Muth is M-U-T-H?
Yeah, and we can
Okay. That's answering Theodora Tsongas's question of what's Katie's last name. It's Muth, M-U-T-H.
Yes.
Okay, and what is the name of Justin's book? Obviously, it's Petroleum 238. And I put in a suggestion as to where you can get it in the Chicago area. It's where I bought it twice. So, and I did put in something about Tammy Thatcher. She's going to be the next person on the stack after I call on Jake. So I meant to put it in when I called on Tammy, but I accidentally pushed the return button, and now Tammy Thatcher's stuff is a kind of farther up in the chat. So I need to call on Jake now. And so unmute yourself, Jake, and ask your question. I think it's Jake. Yeah, go ahead, Jake. Can't hear you.
We can
Can't hear you yet.
we,
Oh, go
we
ahead.
can come back to whoever that is with the phone number and move on to Tammy, and then we'll come back.
Okay, I don't know who the phone number was. I thought it was Jake, but
Well,
I could
we'll
be
call it
wrong.
out
Okay,
when Tammy's done.
whatever. Okay, Tammy, you go ahead and ask your question.
Okay, can you hear me?
Oh, very well.
Okay. This is Tammy Thatcher. I'm in Idaho. I have to say, my father was born in Oklahoma. He and his father got in the propane business and did business in Idaho. It's in your blood. Oil and gas is sort of in your blood if you're from Oklahoma. And so that gas business, and my dad made a great living as a propane accident investigator. Here in Southeast Idaho, we don't have fracking going on, but we have the Idaho National Laboratory, which has had a number of reactors and done a lot of testing through the years, a lot of airborne releases, a lot of wastewater releases, evaporation ponds with radioactivity, and there's an environmental monitoring program, but it will exclude uranium and uranium daughters, basically. So public drinking water programs will look at the radium, will look at gross alpha, might look at uranium-238 if there's enough gross alpha, but it will deliberately avoid saying what plutonium, what any other alpha source. What we have around here with the reactors, you get strange ratios of your radium-226 to 228. You open up a cask, stuff wipes out, you do things, you get airborne, and that airborne it gets breathed into water tanks. And then you monitor it in the water. It doesn't have to get there through aquifer, flow. It can be breathed in to the tanks. It dissolves and it stays in the water, and it is picked up in the monitoring programs. So here's the point I want to make, and you don't have to give the answer, but it's so important what you're doing to point out the regulatory holes and the problems with T-norm, etc. But what's tending to happen is that the pro-nuclear boosters are going to ignore the radium from the mine tailings, from the fuel fabrication, from the operation of reactors, from the packaging and reprocessing of spent fuel. And they're going to ignore it because they actively don't monitor a lot of things. INEL is somewhat unique in having an environmental monitoring program at all. And they have a policy of blaming everything they find on Nevada weapons testing from the past. So they try real hard not to own their own crap and put the blame on someone else. They work real hard to not monitor the uranium and uranium daughters, etc. And so anyway, the trick is comparing nuclear energy to coal, to oil and gas. And already we see, them saying coal plants cause cancer. Nuclear is the answer, and so that is the trick. It's so important what you're saying, but there's going to be journalists they're going to get patted on the head if they make nuclear sound like the answer to the problem here. Do you know what I'm saying? So that's my comment. I'll let you respond to that.
No, I appreciate it a lot. Yeah, all of the comments. Yeah, first, definitely, people, the good people of Oklahoma, I did not totally mean to disparage, but I think, and you're right, the culture of Oklahoma, and this is stated in the whistleblowers who spoke to me, they are scientists, they are environmental scientists in Oklahoma. They don't necessarily think oil and gas is the best industry, but the place that they can find jobs is the oil and gas industry, which in their own words is in part a statement about how contaminating the industry is. Contaminates a lot. They needed a lot of environmental remediation scientists, but there's also just a lot of jobs in it. And so, yes, certainly a lot of people work within the industry. And I think when you're in a state where that's developed, there is a concern that that people can be deceived because it is something that's providing for the state. But certainly it's a well-meaning place, and it's a place of interesting landscapes as well. Incredible going from east to west across the state, and how like every 10 miles you go west, there's like half an inch less rain, and you see that in the landscape. So yeah, I appreciate the comment on Oklahoma. As far as what you're saying about Idaho, I drew up this article that I wrote some time ago, about, I guess not that long ago, about a kind of little known explosion in the Idaho desert that I found on a reporting trip to Idaho some years back. I am aware of some of what you're talking about, and I certainly am aware of what you're describing of this pivoting of energy forms against one another. And I think that is a really important issue, because you see that now with people who are trying to critique solar panels, for example, or wind, that what are we going to do with this idea of what are we going to do with the batteries? And to me, referring to the lithium batteries, I think it's important. And then I'm trying to answer your question. It's a good question and a complicated question, but I think we need a really level-headed and astute scientific analysis across all of these industries. Let's look at what it really takes to produce this energy. And let's look at, like, as you're saying, let's look at the beginning part of the process, the extraction, the waste left over. What happens to that land? What happens to that waste? Let's really go through step by step, and let's piece it all together and try and make a tally for each industry. And I don't even know if that's been appropriately done, because in many industries, again, as you're saying, the industry has tried to like hide parts of the process. So, I mean, right now, if you follow the news, you think, well, oil and gas there's some methane, but that's it. You just stick a thing in the ground, you got a little bit of methane, and that maybe warms the climate with the carbon dioxide, but that's oil and gas. And nuclear is just, you know, if things go wrong, you get a Fukushima. But there's so much more than that, and there's so that much more happening. And if you have a populace that isn't aware of that, then they'll look at solar panels and be like, well, you know, what do you do with this infrastructure? It's like, are you kidding? Do you know how much infrastructure these other industries have, even before we even get to, you know, I mean, it's incredible. But if people are not educated, then they can make decisions such as like, well, you know, nuclear is the way forward, oil and gas is the way forward. I think it's a complicated question, but certainly trying to get people to understand what's really behind the extraction, the waste streams, and the full processing involved with these industries is really important. And I do think that, you know, once you go through that picture, the extractive industries really do seem, you know, like non-renewable, and renewable sources, truly renewable things, you know, despite their problems, you know, do seem more attractive. But you're right, it's a major problem now, and certainly right now in the U.S. at least, there's a renewed push for nuclear, and it's hard to go up against that. And yeah, that's, you know, that's where things are tending right now. Absolutely.
Well, thank you for that discussion. And I just want to put in a plug because Tammy was our expert a couple of 3 months ago, and her newsletter for October is 23 pages. It absolutely covers the waterfront of what's going on in nuclear, not only in the United States, but in you know, internationally. And I recommend it to everybody. I put the link to Tammy's newsletter in the chat. And I've also put in the chat the table of contents from Justin's book. Sometimes it's really useful to look at the table of contents from a book, and it will help you decide, you know, not only to buy the book, but to think about what parts of the book are most interesting to you. And I want to also mention that our friend Michelle Lee has put a link into an article called, I'm going to read the name of the article, Assessing Exposure to Unconventional Oil and Gas Development, Strengths, Challenges, and Implications for Epidemiological Research. And that is something that will interest a lot of people here. So let's go on and call on 847-744-2935.
Yeah. Hi. Can you hear me? Can you hear me?
Now we
Okay.
can hear you, Jake. Go ahead.
Okay. All right. Thank you for your excellent presentation. Could you repeat your name again?
Yeah, Justin, and the last name is Nobel, Nobel.
Okay. And the book is called Petroleum 238. Is that right?
Yeah. Petroleum 238.
Okay. Right. Okay. My question is why does oil and gas sludge contain this radioactive material, and what can be done to avoid the problem, or at least isolate the radioactive sludge from the rest of the waste so that it's not a problem?
Yeah, right. It's a good question, and I think a lot of excited entrepreneurs in the U.S. have you know, asked this question enthusiastically, with rose-tinted glasses, thinking they can solve it. So to answer the first part of the question, brine has oilfield brine, this material we're talking about, this copious waste stream generated by the industry. It has elevated levels of salt. It has elevated levels of many different heavy metals, strontium, barium, arsenic, lead, radium just being a radioactive heavy metal. Radium is moderately soluble. So deep down in the formation, there may be uranium, there may be thorium. It's much less likely that it's going to get mixed in with this, what's essentially a salty stream of water. But whereas radium will be included. Now, there's more science behind that. There is actually a relationship between the saltiness of oilfield brine and radium levels. It doesn't hold true for all oil and gas formations, but it tends that the saltier the brine is, the more likely it is to have elevated levels of radium. And that goes back to, if you again think deep down in the formation, and the brine is mixed in with the oil and gas, and it's also in a porous rock layer, so there's rock all around. And if a brine is very salty, it is more likely that some of these salts are going to be taking up, are going to be, occupying these sorption sites within the rock, which means there's less places for radium to actually, be adhered onto in the rock formation, in the layer, and it's more likely that radium will then be kicked out and thus be part of this fluid waste stream, the brine, that's going to go up to the surface. And there's a paper that describes that much better than I can just did, by a brilliant former University of Austin researcher named Stephen Fisher. And I'll bring that up in just a moment. But that is really the scientific answer behind why is there radium and why are the levels high where they are high. Now, how to remove the radium ends up being a massively complicated problem. And that's what I was trying to get across with some of these facilities. The way to remove it would be to just try and settle out all the solids. But you end up running into problems. The first problem would be if you just use a very simple settling system, such as happens at like a sewage plant. You just literally slow things down and allow things to settle, and you get a sludge or a filter cake at the bottom. The radium levels are going to be exceptional there. Now, that's not complex. It's easy to do that. Just hold things for long enough in a tank, it will settle out. But you have radium levels that are way higher than any traditional landfill are going to be able to accept. So you're faced with a huge waste disposal problem. You're going to have a lot of stuff that you're going to have to take to a low-level radioactive waste disposal site. That's a big cost. And how are you going to bear that cost? And those sites, by the way, are few and far between. There's only a couple in the US, and they're all located out west. So then you can move to, we'll just, down blend it. And then you get into some of these really nightmare responses that we've seen the industry try, where they're trying to reduce those levels. And then treating the rest of the oil field brine waste stream, actually removing the salts, and you still have some heavy metals and radium mixed in. Even if you settle a lot of the solids out early on, that becomes even more technically challenging. So, on the surface, it's easy. You just say, we just pull out the bad stuff, we pull out the radium, but that is proved enormously difficult, if not impossible, in many of the plays across the United States. And I'll drum up the paper, and feel free to, if that leaves you wondering, ask a follow-up question. But I'm going to pull up this Stephen Fisher paper, because that, I think, for people who really want the scientific answer behind why the radium is there, is a wonderful paper.
Thank you so much, Justin. But I want to ask a question, but Connie is wanting to ask another question, and it is already 20 minutes to the hour wherever you are. For some people, it's 20 to 10. And I wonder how Justin is feeling about continuing, because it's actually past time. Are you ready to continue for another 20 minutes or so? Justin?
I can, maybe not another 20 minutes, but certainly, I can take another question or two. Yeah. This is the
Okay.
paper, by the way, and this is just a brilliant paper. This is really one of like the Bible papers, geologic, geochemical, and geographic controls on NORM, that's naturally occurring radioactive materials in produced water from Texas oil and gas and geothermal reservoirs. R. Stephen Fisher. And Fisher goes through exactly really the best scientific explanation of why the radium is there. And we still don't know exactly the answer to that, but Fisher does, uses, and even though it's an outdated paper, it's not really, it's really still the cutting edge of the science in terms of why. So that's another good one for people who want to follow up. I'll go back to the top of it. Yeah.
Okay, so let's let Connie unmute herself and ask her question, and then I want to ask a question.
Thanks, Jan. This summer I attended an NRC meeting. As I said, as Jan said, I'm from Ohio, called Integrated Materials Performance Evaluation Program. And the program deals, Ohio is an agreement state, which means that other than the reactors that we have, the Ohio Department of Health regulates, and that's in quotes, the non-reactor radioactive enterprises. And I asked about, I've been doing this for 52 years, and I asked several questions at this meeting, but I did ask about the brine applications on the roads. And the NRC seemed to indicate that they don't, we know that, that it's radioactive, besides of the whole salt danger. But the NRC seemed to indicate that they don't have anything to do with regulating any kind of brine applications. You mentioned the pool salts. Do you know who supposedly regulates that?
Yeah, so thank you. It's a good thing to mention before we end. No federal agency regulates oilfield radioactivity. So here we go. I'm just drawing up a slide where I give quotes that I received. And here's the Nuclear Regulatory Commission. There's a great spokesperson I've been in touch with for years there. The waste products from oil and gas drilling operations are referred to as technologically enhanced naturally occurring radioactive materials. We do not regulate this material. They don't. So the Nuclear Regulatory Commission has taken in radioactive medical industry waste, the nuclear industry, of course, and its waste, but oil and gas waste has never been brought under their umbrella. So then we go to the EPA, which says it very clearly. There is no federal agency that specifically regulates the radioactivity brought to the surface by oil and gas development. This is a direct quote from the EPA to me. So the answer to your question is no one, which is, of course, part of the problem here.
Okay, and what I wanted to ask you about, or to ask you to do, is to explain to us the things from the book that I was kind of waiting for. One is to describe what happens to what has happened to some of the people who had jobs cleaning out the pipes, the pipes from oil and gas development drilling, that oil drilling pipes that were going to be reused. And then there was the story about the guy who went into the big tank where the sludge was in the bottom, and he would you mind telling us those two stories? That's what I kind of want people to hear.
Yeah, I don't know if I know the specific workers you're referring to, but I mean, some of them die. The book is dedicated to a number of people who passed away in the term of my reporting. and one of them is a worker who was a brine hauler who also spent time cleaning out sludge tanks. His exposure was complex. I think there was an exposure to fracking chemicals that have never really been identified. So we certainly can't say, oh, radium killed him. It may well have been fracking chemicals. And like what happened is he was in a tank, and like you have like a water line. If you're standing in something, like a pink liquid, there'll be like a pink line, like a bathtub ring. He had this skin condition that developed exactly up to the point where he was standing in this tank cleaning out this waste. And then he got these strange rashes that moved around his body. He spent time in and out of the emergency room. He could not get medical care, and this is common. The medical community is not informed of this job. It doesn't even have to be that they're trying to ignore these people. They just don't know what they're really faced with. They don't know the chemicals. They don't know about radium or radon. They don't necessarily get good diagnoses. And it's also the issue of, in many oil and gas areas, the hospital, of course, one of the first things the industry will give money to, the fire department, the police, the hospital. So the hospital might have the name of the oil and gas industry right there, thanking them for their donations. And in the end, this worker took to, home remedies, like bathing in turmeric and eating a lot of raw garlic because they were really just trying to cure themselves, and they passed away. That is, and it ends up being a really frustrating situation because it's hard to wrap science or data around it, or even medical judgment around it, when these people just can't get looked at appropriately. And I don't know if there's many physicians who really have the basis of knowledge to understand all of the different contaminants they've been exposed to and give a good diagnosis. But there are groups working on that. Physicians for Social Responsibility is probably one of the best ones. There's a group in Pennsylvania called Southwest Pennsylvania Environmental Health Project. They're fantastic. And they are formed of physicians or former physicians who have really worked to understand these issues. So that is changing. And just the other day, just this week, actually, I connected a worker with Physicians for Social Responsibility. He has symptoms that he can't really piece together. And I don't think they can diagnose him, but they can at least help him navigate the medical system and try and find better care. But it's like a world of kind of unknowns for these workers, and it's not a very helpful world at this point. And it's also a world where they don't necessarily have legal redress unless they're actually dying of cancer, which can be very frustrating. They can be suffering quite a lot, have debilitating breathing issues, or stamina issues, or gut issues. But a lawyer's not going to take the case unless they can say, okay, you've got lung cancer, and now we can let's go to court with it. This book, by the way, I brought up is a pretty incredible book. It's about the one big attorney in the US who actually took the oil and gas industry on in regards to this specific issue, oil field workers facing radiation exposure. And he passed away recently himself. But he had a complicated legal team. And I just want to go to this slide. Where'd that go? Here we go. So he used a program in these legal cases called IREP, the Interactive Radio Epidemiological Program. It's a program of the US CDC, initially intended for nuclear weapons workers to show whether their cancers could indeed be attributed to their radiation exposure in their work. Now, in this case, the work is not nuclear weapons work, it's oil field work, and the workers did a variety of different jobs. And you have here the type of cancer they had, a general calculation of what they were exposed to, or their dose, and then the assigned share by this program, IREP. And that's essentially saying 99.73% certainty, given their exposure as it's been tabulated by the scientist that worked with this attorney, that their cancer came from the radiation exposure in their work. Now, of course, that's a high number, and it's this is a legal case. It's not peer-reviewed science, but what we know is that these corporations involved in these cases were some of the biggest on earth: Chevron, ExxonMobil, Shell, and they settled. This is an industry that does not like to settle, and this attorney, made quite a lot of money bringing these cases, and they were time and again able to beat the oil and gas industry on this issue, which I think is another, people asked about powerful, positive things going forward. The industry is vulnerable on this issue. It's very hard to fight them on climate, and we've seen that. They've essentially taken over the global climate change conferences. But on this issue, they have quite a lot of vulnerabilities, and part of that is because you can trace the contaminants right into a human body, into the landscape in ways that it's hard with methane or carbon dioxide to make such direct links.
Well, this has been really great, Justin. And of course, we're getting a lot of questions in the chat about whether or not you'll give us your slides. And I'm wondering if you could send your slide deck to me or Dave, and so that we could have it available for people that would like to be able to look at all of these slides. Is that going to be possible?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that's
okay,
possible.
great.
Well,
So the email of both me and Dave Kraft, and so if you could allow us to have your slides, that would be great, and we'll send them to the people who are asking for them. And gosh, you did manage to go 2 hours. And so I'm going to turn it back to Dave. I would like to just let him be the one to close the meeting. And thank you everyone for coming, and your questions were wonderful and the answers the same.
Thanks, Jan. Yes, I want to second what you said. Justin, this was really an incredible presentation. You're probably aware that, in the 20-teens or so, Illinois itself was struggling with the fracking issue in Southern Illinois. And fortunately, bureaucracy killed it, so it didn't get anywhere. But the way the nuclear industry has had a resurrection, if the Biden administration or whoever comes next comes along, they may lavish it with money, and we'll have another round of fracking to be concerned about. So thank you for putting this together. A little bit of housekeeping before we move on. Next month, as I mentioned, we are not going to be on the last Thursday because that's Thanksgiving. So on November 21st, our guest is Dr. Aaron Datesman, who will be talking about the dirty secrets of nuclear power. And that'll be Thursday the 21st, 7 p.m. Central Time. And you'll get an announcement if you've been a member of our Night with the Experts in the past, for sure. As I mentioned, tonight's program was taped, and we will be able to make that available to folks who want to see the Zoom recording, and hopefully we'll get it up online on YouTube in the not too distant future.
Do you mind if I say something about next week's presentation, Dave?
Next month's?
That's right.
Yes.
November the 20 what? First?
21st.
Yeah, November. The book is called The Dirty Secrets of Nuclear Power or something. Anyway, Dirty Secrets. And it's free. I can't believe it. Springer has sprung for this book, and you can get it from Springer online and just download it. And I have downloaded it, and I can give it to you. I can send it to you by attachment if it's pretty big attachment. So you have to be able to accept the attachment, or just go to the download yourself. And it's a very interesting book. And Aaron Datesman wrote the 7th chapter, which is about the epidemiology of, radiation sickness just in general. I'm not being specific enough about that. So that's all I wanted to say. I hope you will download the book and see us next month.
And I'll add to that as we wrap up tonight, everyone who was in attendance tonight will get a copy of the chat in your email. So we want to thank you. And again, Justin, great job tonight. If you stick around a few minutes as we wrap up, we'd appreciate that. For the rest of you, well, we heard enough about horror stories, but have a good time next week at this time during Halloween. Maybe you can go as your favorite nuclear disaster as a costume or something like that.
Your favorite.
So, thank you all for joining us with Night with the Experts. We hope to see you next month.
And kind of stay on, Justin, do you mind?
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Really fantastic questions. It's really a pleasure to talk with you all. Thank you.